Absolutely not. I, like many other people, including some of the most senior retired British diplomats, a lot of analysts, a lot of very senior observers of international relations believe that there is a direct link between the two cases on all sorts of levels. So whenever I hear that people say, oh, well, there is no link between Kosovo and South Ossetia, I don't believe that for one moment. I think there's all sorts of links that we can draw, and both in terms of law, politics, but also in terms of shaping the agenda of international politics and the way that we've seen things develop. The Russians were very unhappy about what took place in Kosovo, and what many people didn't understand was that there was a lot of concern in Russia about the chance of recognizing Kosovo and what that would mean in public opinion. Many Russians asked, why is it that if the European Union, the United States, could recognize Kosovo and the right of the Kosovo Albanians to have independence, then why wouldn't the Russians do it for its own citizens in South Ossetia and Abkhazia? So at that moment, as soon as the West recognized the independence of Kosovo, I think it became almost inevitable that the Russians had to act to recognize Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So even if it's not entirely legal, what Russia has done, it must be recognized that they were simply responding to what they felt was an illegal move by the West.
So basically the Western answer that the Kosovo case is unique is basically the only answer they can provide.
Yes, the argument that Kosovo is independent. I've yet to hear any really good arguments or sound arguments from officials as to why Kosovo can be regarded as a unique case when all sorts of other ethnic and separatist conflicts elsewhere in the world are not recognized as being equivalent to Kosovo. There is simply no justification for this view. People would say, oh, well, Kosovo was under UN administration for 10 years. But the simple fact is that UN administration came about as a result of an action that was taken without UN Security Council approval. It also was based on a UN Security Council resolution which continued to recognize the Kosovo as being part of Serbia. Well, Serbia as obviously the continuation state of the Republic of Yugoslavia. And I think that you're seeing very many people saying that, look, this argument that Kosovo is unique, well, every conflict is unique. You can't make that sort of argument and say Kosovo is entitled to have one particular outcome and all sorts of other conflicts are going to be denied those rights. So as much as people would say Kosovo is unique, Kosovo is unique, Kosovo is unique, in the view of many of analysts, in view of much of the world, that argument just doesn't hold up.
If Georgia would, for example, ask the same court to rule on the same matter regarding the separation of its two parts of the state, what would be the position of the Western states then?
Very good question. I would be very surprised if they wouldn't want to support something like that. And that, I think, also gives rise to the accusations of double standards, that they would be happy to use the International Court of Justice and the mechanisms of international politics and international law when it suits them. But when it doesn't suit them, then they won't do so. And I think that this is the danger that both Russia, the United States, and now, I think, in many ways, the European Union have got themselves into a real fix. All of them now are talking and being accused of double standards. And I think that if you step back and look at this from the perspective of the rest of the world, look at this from the perspective of China, look at this from the perspective of much of Africa and Asia, they are absolutely appalled at what they are seeing, at the way that Russia, the United States, and the European Union are maneuvering in order to play great power politics and ignore international law, claiming that they respect it. And so I think that nobody comes out of this looking good. In the eyes of the rest of the world. All sides are looking bad because of what's happened in Kosovo, because of what's happened in South Ossetia. And the double standards that are at play, I think, are really breathtaking in their magnitude.
The Resolution 1244 of the Security Council is still valid. As
Absolutely.
far as I can tell.
Until it's rescinded, the UN Security Council Resolution 1244 remains in force. And this is what was very interesting about the case of Kosovo. In most cases where UN establishes peacekeeping missions or missions to do with administration, what they have to do is introduce new resolutions to renew the mandate of that force. Kosovo was very different. They created a mandate under UN Security Council Resolution 1244, which remained in force until such time as a new Security Council resolution is passed, which would overwrite it or update it. That hasn't happened. That's not going to happen. So as far as anyone, legal scholars are concerned, and most observers are concerned, UN Security Council Resolution 1244 remains in place. And interestingly, many of the countries which have recognized Kosovo's independence are also arguing that 1244 remains in place because they need it to remain in place in order to manage the handover to the new EU mission, in order to manage the continuation of peacekeeping forces there. So we're in a very, very ambiguous situation. I think this is why many people believe that even though many countries say that Kosovo is independent, the reality in most capitals, even in those countries that have recognized it, is that they know full well that Kosovo is not an independent state like the other 192 members of the UN, and it's not likely to be an independent state like the other 192 members of the UN for a very long time yet.
But if we look at the realistic situation on the terrain in Kosovo, it's very homogeneous society. More than 95% of its people are Albanians who strongly believe that independence is their only way of survival politically and socially. How can they achieve their goal without breaching international law? Or if breaching international law here could be acceptable?
Well, I mean, the thing is, what we have to accept is that, that this applies equally to any number of other territories around the world. I mean, we could look at neighboring Republika Srpska, we could look at northern Cyprus, we could look at northern Iraq. Plus, also, there's territories, the Basque region, Scotland. You've got all sorts of territories where the vast majority of people feel themselves to belong to one ethnic group, and a large proportion of those would want to break away. And we recognize this. I mean, one UN Secretary General once argued that if there was an unfettered right to self-determination, he would be leading an organization with 5,000 members. We have to ask ourselves, at what point do you draw a line? At what point do you say, yes, we recognize that there's a proportion of population within a given territory, within a state that wants independence, but we have to say, no, the sanctity of state borders must be accepted. And this, I think, is really where, Kosovo has become a key issue. So I think that, this argument that, because the vast majority of people want to be independent and they represent a proportion of the population, then they must have that right, goes against everything that we have argued for in international politics in the last 60 years. And why did we go, try and prevent the breakup of the Balkans and breakup of Bosnia, for example, if now we're going to go to a position where peoples within the territory who want independence should have it? No, I think, we're in very, very unstable ground now.
Don't you feel that states as political entities are pretty abstract and people who live in those states have other desires? Why, for example, wouldn't the United Nations or the international community accept any part of any country to separate if the vast majority of its people wishes to do so? Because, I mean, in the end, the life of the people who live in those territories are what should be respected.
Well, to be very frank with you, I'm all for that. If we want to have a serious discussion, and this was what was very interesting, at the very start of the Kosovo status process, the Russian government said this to the United States. If you want to have a debate about new rules for self-determination, new rules for what we consider to be the recognition of states, let's have that debate, let's have that discussion. And that was turned down. And I think that what we've now seen and the way that things have developed is we're now trying to argue that Kosovo represents a unique case. And there's a lot of countries that don't believe that. And I think that perhaps, we need to have this discussion. And if we decide, yes, we are going to recognize that the rights of people to determine their own future is paramount, then yes, let these people have their own states. But let's not just argue that it's something that applies only to Kosovo, but it doesn't then apply to the people of South Ossetia. It doesn't apply to the people of Abkhazia, that it doesn't apply to Iraqi Kurds, that it doesn't apply to the Scots, doesn't apply to the Catalans, doesn't apply to the Basque, doesn't apply to the thousands of ethnic groups around the world. And so I think that this is really the issue that we're looking at here, and I think that this is what a lot of countries are very afraid of. They got themselves into a mess in Kosovo, they know where this is leading, and now they needed to get out of Kosovo, but they wanted to try and do it in a way that they said, no, Kosovo is a unique example, but it doesn't apply to other people. But you know what? Maybe it should apply to other people. And if that's a debate, then that's going to be a major debate in international politics, probably the debate in international politics for the 21st century.